I'm Kia. I'm an Agile Success Manager. I'm part of the customer success team here at Plandek, and I'm the account manager for Alef Education. So I deal with any queries, anything that Alef need, really, any help that they reach out to us for. I handle that, and I work very closely with Jayr. So Jayr is one of the heads of engineering at Alef, but I'll allow him to introduce himself.
Thank you, Kir. Nice to meet you, everyone in the room. I'm glad to be here. My name is Jayr. I work at Alef as a head of engineering. I've been here for about 3.5 years at this point, and I'm working with 3 teams, but actually also like supporting and working with the full engineering organization.
Thanks, Jayr. So the reason I've asked Jayr here today is because he's in a very unique position with Alef. So he was actually tasked with the initial rollout of Plandek at Alef. And then since then, Alef have moved to start to approach a full rollout throughout their organization. So we're going to be exploring their full Plandek journey right from the start all the way to where we're at now. So without further ado, Jayr, can you give us a bit of background about Alef Education?
Yes. Actually came up with something to make it a bit more like visual.
Okay, great.
You can see the about Alef Education, right?
Yeah.
Very good. So we are Alef Education, a company based in the UAE. As of now, we have a little bit over 500 people working in the company, out of which we have about 180 in product development, both like PMs, engineers, designers, and so on. We're proudly serving over 900,000 students and 60,000 teachers. These are spread across 4 different countries, the UAE, the United States, Morocco, and Indonesia. So this is Alef in a nutshell. Right now we have in product development, we have about 20 teams. We call them stream aligned. Some people call them feature teams. But we also have other like teams of specialists such as like machine learning, security, and so on. So that's it pretty much.
No problem. So what actually led Alef to start using Plandek?
Interesting. So, you know, I think most companies, they, you know, like I had prepared something also to help me with this. You know, they have a stream value, or sorry, a value stream that looks something like what we're looking at here, from opportunity selection, requirements planning, design, build, test, release, and run. And there is also this thing in the software industry, they call it the bimodal IT, which is basically, you know, this notion that whenever you want to, you know, push value or deliver value to the customer faster, then you would need to sacrifice quality. This is something that people talk about, but in recent years, it has proven that it's more of a fallacy. There are ways that you can achieve both velocity and quality at the same time. So what led us to start using Plandek was exactly a struggle that we had pretty much here at the end of this value stream, because it took us a lot of time to get things that had already been completed the development phase. But then after the development was done, we had other phases that happened later, such as performance testing, like we had security checks and other types of you know, checks that we had in place. And so this time, and I will show you this later when we look at the dashboard, that the time to deploy, the very last part of the delivery pipeline, it was like taking the biggest amount of time. So, you know, basically we understood that we We had a problem there, like there was a bottleneck, and we wanted to, like to come up, like we had actually different ideas on how to improve that. But obviously, like if we just tried like different, like random things without having a way to know whether those experiments, whether those initiatives, they were actually helping us to get better at that, or reducing the time it was taking us, we had to come up with some type of measurement. So we did some research, like we read the book that you can see here in the slide, Accelerate. So we decided that we wanted uh, to start tracking the 4 metrics that they talk about in the book: the delivery lead time, the deployment frequency, the change failure rate, and the mean time to restore. So that's when we like started considering different tools. We started obviously with Jira, because that's where most of our how to say, like the workflow is happening. But then we quickly realized that we would also need to bring data from other sources, such as the code repository, the CI/CD pipelines, and we started looking for tools that could do that, and we eventually stumbled on Plandek and started interacting with you guys. I think like the second thing that also led us to start using Plandek was, as any company, like I think the things that I talked about here, they are more like lagging indicators. So like we can observe them later in the cycle. We want to deliver that value to the customer, but only later when we are in that delivery phase that we can, observe these 4 metrics. Many companies, they are mostly focused on the first half of this value stream. So we also wanted to get better at that, because we used to only maximize for velocity. But then we understood there were some other aspects of that, such as like how predictable a team was. Like if, for example, they selected 10 stories that they wanted to deliver by the beginning of a sprint, if they would actually deliver those 10 stories at the end, or maybe for like a number of different reasons, they would only be able to deliver, I don't know, like 5 out of 10. So I think those were the main 2 drives we had back in that day.
Okay, so would I be correct in saying that at the beginning, Alef identified kind of an area for bottlenecks and things that you really wanted to improve on, and at the same time you wanted to improve your quality as well as velocity to really try and drive your delivery efficiency?
Exactly, because we didn't want to sacrifice one or the other. And we quickly, like we did research, for example, in the book and other books that we have read, also like a lot of research on the internet. And we understood that we didn't need to do those things. But then even if we went for all of those ideas, such as like shifting left most of those concerns into the value stream, not as like after the development was done, we would still need to somehow make sure that that baseline, in this case, mostly focusing on the delivery lead time, that baseline that we had at the beginning was either sustained or being reduced, right? We never wanted it to go above anymore.
Yeah, so
So
you
that's
had a
why we understand.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So you had a benchmark for the value that you were delivering to your users and could sustain that. So with at the start of the journey, then when you did decide to come on board with Plandek, what was the biggest challenge of trying to drive the delivery efficiency initiative out to the teams that you were tasked with?
Yeah, so we had 2 main challenges. The first one was the knowledge, because many people, they already had some exposure to working with metrics. Back in that day, We were also like in the process of adopting a goal setting framework, collecting qualitative, data about the teams. So there was like a big gap in knowledge because like some people, they understood more. They might not be like experts, but they had some understanding. Some others, they were completely new to working in such a way, to thinking about those things. So there was like this knowledge in, this gap in knowledge. So I think the first challenge was like leveling that knowledge, making sure that people understood why we wanted to do that. It was very interesting that, the fact that we started considering this, it started driving so many important conversations. And, I would say that when you consider like adopting it, it already starts a process of maturing at the same time. So it's not that you need to mature before, but as much as you mature along. So you are doing this, and the more you do, the more you try, and certain things you learn, some others you are successful, and then you are always like in this process of learning and implementing, and implementing. I would say this was the biggest challenge by far at the beginning. But then something very interesting happened right when we were maybe like 1 month or 2 months in the implementation, which was, the data hygiene. Like the first thing that people, they would say, when we met for the first time, maybe I was in a call with the leader and the team, and they would look at that dashboard, at those metrics, and they would, they would even like their faces, they would look like surprised. And then they would say something, no, but this doesn't make sense, or this does not reflect reality. And then we would say, okay, let's try to validate it then. So there was always this like initial like skepticism of like, is this really reflecting the way that we work? And then we would try to go to the different data sources and, check those data points manually. Sometimes it was the case that it was wrong, and then also I will show a little bit later. For example, one that I can remember very clearly was that the commit messages we sent to GitHub, they didn't contain like the Jira ticket. So a part of the quality of the data depended on, having the ability to link something that started in Jira and then was committed to GitHub, and eventually, not like we notified about that deployment to Plandek. So that piece of data, because we didn't have those commit references, the quality of the data wasn't very good. And then we started like doing tracking, even this, how many commits didn't have such reference, and start like driving that number down so that the other metrics would be more reliable, more accurate. This is just one example. There were other examples like configuring the pipelines, or like configuring the dashboards properly. There were like many of these examples, and in that process, it was also very interesting to see that the team, they started to become more aware of their own like data footprint, like the data that reflected their like ways of working, their culture, their mindset, and also like taking ownership over that. Once they became aware of those things, then they start like taking ownership and acting on those things. So just to conclude, I would say that those two main challenges were the gap in knowledge and the data hygiene. The first, we started like driving those conversations and bringing people up to speed with those ideas. And the second one was more about making sure that the data they would see in the dashboards reflected reality, and that they could start taking ownership and acting on it.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a very interesting point, actually, that you say once you facilitated that adoption and kind of got over those initial concerns, that teams actually begin to like buy into Plandek themselves and eventually became somewhat self-driven and were trying to drive their own kind of initiatives and their own goals, which is quite an interesting point there. So based on those main challenges that you touched on there, obviously, as we said at the start, you're in the unique position to talk on this topic simply because you were tasked personally with the rollout of Plandek. So how did you actually go about implementing the tool?
So basically, we had this approach of, we selected a couple of teams at the beginning. So this was, basically volunteering. Like I had a couple of teams that I was working with, and I really wanted to do this. So I, convinced those teams to try this out. But then there were some other teams that also opted in. It was completely like a volunteer, people that wanted to try this. Maybe in some way they were already like tracking like some metrics, but then they saw an opportunity to do something a bit more structured that would make whatever they were trying to do easier. And then the objective with this initial approach was to come up with a role model. We wanted to have a story of a team that tried that, let's say, for 6 months, and then, like they reduced their delivery lead time by, I don't know, 20%. Maybe they increased their deployment frequency. Maybe they became more predictable as a team. And they wanted to, like, they could tell that story to other teams that we could then later on board. Basically, we wanted to go in like to each and every team and share that story, and then help them, be onboarded with this approach. This is very much part of our DNA at Alef. I think like we always try to do things like bottom up. I think this is the way that we, like our people, they feel like included. They take ownership over the initiatives. They buy in, and they buy into things that they believe make sense. But with that said, I would like to also say that the initial implementation was slower than we would like it to be. And then, after, a couple of months that we were trying, this approach, we understood that many leaders, in theory, they understood the value of, tracking those metrics, having those conversations, looking at those data points consistently, maybe introducing them in the ceremonies that they had each and every sprint, each and every week. In theory, they understood the value, but in practice, we weren't, really like doing it or pursuing it, or we were doing it like not as consistent. So what we did was, we sat all the leaders, all the senior leaders, and we had a discussion to really like understand if this was something that we wanted to do. If this was making sense, if we wanted to double down on it. And it was a consensus that yes, we do want. But then we said, okay, since the adoption is not going as fast as we wanted, then maybe like let's get like this group here advocating for it, evangelizing these ideas. Not just this like one, initial group of people, but all of us, all the leaders, since we believe in this, we've been seeing some results, and we want to implement it across. So let's all the leaders pursue this across the board. And that's what we did. So we brought the leaders into the picture here. And then once we did that, I think like things started, getting much more traction. Then we started like seeing the teams, like now if you go to Plandek, if you access like a dashboard or a workspace of a specific team, then maybe like they have like dashboards that no other team has. In other words, they are like taking ownership over their data. They are looking at the data from different lenses, and then getting to their own conclusions, doing like improvements based on that. So that's how it went.
Okay, great. So would you say that the initial bottom-up approach worked initially, but eventually they kind of lacked the guidance, like the initiatives that they were trying to achieve with the data? So once you got that top down meets bottom up approach, that's where you kind of met in the middle there, and it really started to create that driving force.
Yes, very, very well said, Kier. And you said something that I wanted to say, which is as in the beginning, I touched on the bottom up, but I forgot to say that then I think like this final adjustment we made, it was more of a top down, or maybe combining both, it would be a meet in the middle, because we continue to still have this part of our DNA, but then bringing the leaders to advocate, to evangelize for this, made all the difference. Thank you for saying that.
No problem. So we've touched on where Alef's mindset was at the beginning before Plandek, and then how it's changed and kind of grown throughout the implementation. So you've been with Plandek 2 years now. So where would you say that the adoption currently lies, and what are your next steps?
All right, so I would like to share my screen again to show some data.
No problem.
All right. You can see the screen, right?
Yep.
So I just want to show you something very interesting here. So I'm going to show the data of the last 12 months here. So this is the Plandek dashboard. We have this one workspace that's for like all the teams combined, so basically like we were like something like the delivery time, it was about like 666 hours. So it was a lot. And as I said at the beginning, like time to review 4 hours, time to approve 11 hours, time to merge and close the pull requests 8 hours, but then time to deploy 642 hours. It's clear where the bottleneck was. So this is how things were looking, when we like just average like 1 year back. Also, like when it comes to the deployment frequency, when we're looking here at the average 1 year back, it was 2.52. So now I just want to quickly change it to a couple of different time spans, and then we can look at that same number. So you can see that when we reduce, we start coming more towards the present. These numbers, they are like looking a little bit better. So for example, the delivery time is a bit smaller already. The frequency of deployment was like pretty much the same. But then we do it again, we come like to the last 12 weeks. And then you see that we are like going down in delivery time even more. The frequency of deployment was still like more or less the same. But then when we look at the last 4 weeks, so then we can see, like the delivery time is now about like 159 hours. So compared to that same like 600 hours that we had about like 1 year ago, and also like the frequency of the deployments is going up, right? So I just wanted to show this to make the point that there is a trend. The trend for the frequency of the deployment is pointing upwards, although this is an area that we still want to do much better at. The delivery time, it's going down. So we are like finding ways that we can, get that value to the customers faster. And just to wrap up here, I also talked about like the data hygiene. This is one of the metrics that we use to to track, like making sure that this number is under control. So like it was higher at the like in the past, and then we pushed it down. Something that we still need to continue to improve on. Also the plan to done ratio, which was a metric more focused at the beginning of the value stream. And then to finalize this part, there are two metrics missing from the DORA. One is the mean time to restore, and the other one is the change failure rate. The mean time to restore, it's something that we have recently implemented, a proof of concept, because we are using Datadog. So we came up with something that would allow us to track like the mean time to restore whenever we have an incident. We did it for one service, and we are planning to roll this out for the coming services, probably in the next OKR cycle. And then there's also the change failure rate, which we are working together with Plandek, with the help of Jayr, of Will, to implement that as well. So in summary, going back to your question, Jayr, I would say that, what's next for us is to, increase the scope of the metrics that we are tracking. But I think it's also very important for us to make sure that the baseline that we set in the like last 1.5 years, or, for the teams that were there at the very beginning, even longer, make sure that that baseline is not lost, and that, at the same time that we're trying to improve other things, that we're not getting lost and losing the things that we have already improved on. So I would say that's the summary of what we see next for us.
No problem. I really appreciate your time there, Jayr. So it's quite interesting to see as well that the maturity of the metrics and the numbers that you displayed there really kind of match the maturity of your journey with Plandek. So as you said, like at the start there, where there were a lot of opportunities to improve, and like now has the culture and mindset internally at Alef is changing and becoming more data driven. As you said, a lot of teams are kind of steering themselves with Plandek. You can actually also reflect that within the metrics. We do actually have a question that's come through as well. So Chris has asked, how easy is it to ensure that development teams are updating their tickets religiously? And equally, are you interested in any outliers?
Okay, so that's an interesting question. I think when you say like updating the tickets, you're mostly like referring to when people, they go to the, in this case, let's say the Jira dashboards, and then moving them across, the statuses or the columns on the board, if I understood it correctly. Like I think the way we look at it, like whatever you see in metrics, it's basically a reflection of our mindset and our culture, right? So whenever like I work with the team and then I spot a problem, for example, like, okay, a team, maybe like they, moved something in progress and they've been doing a bunch of things and they only move it to done by the end of the sprint because they forgot to update the board, something like that. Then it's mostly like a problem in the culture or a problem in the mindset. And then, we have that conversation to try and understand those things. But then, just having the conversation is not actionable enough. I think that's why, like, there is, I remember there are a couple of metrics in Plandek that you can observe, like that when people are, quickly moving the ticket towards the end. Let me just quickly see if I can remember the name of that one.
Do you mean the
think,
first time pass rates?
No, I think it's like speed something. Speeding transitions rate. So basically, like when people are doing exactly that, and you can surface that in the form of a metric, and then, like knowing what is the baseline, and then, like in the spirit of agility, like having these conversations with the teams, like every, if you work with sprints, then every sprint, or if you don't work with sprints, but every now and then, like having that conversation, trying to incorporate certain ideas or practices that could improve that, you know, I mean, the focus is not improving the number, it's just adopting the behavior, but you can see the reflection of that behavior in the number. So if the behavior is actually there, and if it's working, if it's making sense, then we would see that reflected in the number.
Yeah. And no problem there. If you wouldn't mind me adding there as well, Jay, from my experience working with the Alef teams internally, I think it's quite aware that they know that they get out what they put in. So say, for example, if they're not keeping up to date on data hygiene, they know their metrics aren't going to accurately reflect where they're at. So therefore, when they're trying to make improvements, it might actually come back to bite them if they're not keeping up to date on it, because they're not going to get an accurate reflection of where they're at to therefore improve on it. Okay, I can see that we've just run over a little bit of time. So if anybody's got any questions, please just feel free to send them in and we can answer them after the webinar. But we thank you for your attendance and we hope everybody enjoyed their time.